Apparently this mic does sound like it's on. Is this on? And folks here? Fabulous. Oh, even at the back. Wonderful. Yeah, yes, I'm ready to go. So yeah, now there might be some other folks trickling in after the postlude, but thank you all for coming. I have a little bit of paperwork. I obviously, as Scott let the cat out of the bag early, am not Sarah Liegl. Her husband came home with COVID late, not this past week, but the week before, and she was thinking everything was fine, and she ended up getting it again, and so she texted me yesterday. She said, "There's no way." So. But Sarah and I work closely together, so just to give folks an overview of Interfaith Action we used to be the Council of Churches in St. Paul up until 2015. As of now, Interfaith Action, we have 4 main programs. One is Project Home, which is the one that you all know, that's been going since 1998, I believe. And then our other 3 programs, one I'm the director of, it's called Opportunity St. Paul, and it's all about mobilizing volunteers from houses of worship to get connected to volunteer opportunities both in Interfaith Action programs as well as with some of our partner organizations who do tutoring, job coaching, things like that in the community. And then our 3rd program, which is our longest running, is our Department of Indian Work. That's been going since 1952. And it is now a completely indigenous-led department. We do after-school youth enrichment programming for American Indian youth on the east side. We have a food shelf and clothing closet that's now located up in Little Canada, which is actually much closer to where the families had to travel when we were in the building on Summit Avenue at 1671. And so for those of you who don't know, also, we moved. We used to be in a building which was an old Latter-day Saints worshiping space. We moved in there in 1962, and we sold it in the fall of 2021. So we are now sort of bilocated. The Project Home program, as Elise mentioned, is located at the Provincial House, which is the old convent for the Sisters of the St. Joseph of Carondelet, right on the corner of Randolph and Fairview. So we're occupying that space now, and in the transition from being a mobile housing shelter to a standalone shelter, we've gone from a 40-bed capacity up to a 108-bed capacity. So we have up to 100 beds available for families, and then we have 8 additional beds available for women over the age of 55. Apparently, those are 2 populations that Ramsey County allows to cohabitate. So we were able to add a little bit of additional space there, but most of the administrative offices for Interfaith Action are located at the Provincial House, and then we have a couple of administrative offices, and then all of our Department of Indian Work offices up at the Food Shelf location. And that's 3080 Centerville Road. It's right where 35E and 694 kind of come together. If you're taking one of those exits, you can actually almost see the building, the building where it is. That location is actually much better, not only for our families. Most of our families were coming over from the east side, so there were multiple bus stops that they needed to take, and then they had to walk multiple blocks in the winter down to Summit. The food shelf was in the basement, so you had to go up and down. We didn't have a loading dock. This new location, it's on the main level. It's nice and bright. It's set up and laid out like a grocery store. I believe we are the only culturally specific food shelf in the state of Minnesota that is a super shelf site. So there's an organization that will come into food shelves and lay them out as if you're going into a grocery store. We're very, very proud of that. But I know you all came to hear a little more about, it's in Little Canada. Yep, Little Canada. Yep. So I know you all came to hear more about Project Home. I have some information. I'm just going to go ahead and pass these out. There's some overview of our most recent demographics, where families kind of have been with us and then kind of where they've ended up after they've left shelter. And then we have a few opportunities for, we have a winter gear adopt-a-family drive that we're doing. We have a holiday dignity shop that we're putting on. And then always the need for weekend meal teams that Elise highlighted. Thank you so much. There was so much heavy lifting that I didn't have to do as part of the sermon or as a preamble to the sermon. So thank you so much, Elise. Yeah, that'd be great. I think we have enough. I think I want to say 14 or 15. If you could actually give me one of those as a cheat sheet. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. So as I mentioned, we now have, we went from a 40 guest capacity to a 108 guest capacity. Most of the time when I ask Sarah, we're hovering somewhere between 80 and 90 guests and families. There's some, this first initial page kind of gives you some really good data points. One of the ones that I think is really helpful to keep in mind is that 79% of the families that enter Project Home are from Ramsey County, which means that the other 21 are not only from other Minnesota counties, but we actually get phone calls from others. We get phone calls from other states, but we also get people who have come up and their last known residence was in another state. And the other thing that I want to make sure everybody knows here is the way that Project Home receives families is through Ramsey County's emergency shelter services by calling 211. So if anybody needs access to shelter services or a variety of other housing services, mental health services, dialing 211 is the way to sort of get triaged and get locked into the system, particularly if there's requests for housing. All the families that we serve come through that system. Pull up my notes here again. Oop. So, yes, please. And questions throughout are most. Yes. It was 40 individuals. We had a 40-bed capacity. So each congregation had a capacity of up to 20 people. So if families are of varying size. One of the things that's really nice about the Provincial House now is over the years, as they did work to make the rooms not individual single-cell rooms, but some of them were event rooms for conferences and other things like that. They didn't take the plumbing out of the rooms, but they took the non-load-bearing walls down. So there are rooms that have a sink in them that a family of 8 can be in. The whole family can be together, as opposed to being in 2 or 3 different, smaller rooms, being broken up. So that makes a big difference. But yeah, when we had the mobile model, that model was up to 20 individuals per house of worship. And each month there were 2 houses of worship hosting. So I don't know who the other October congregation was, but House of Hope was October, and then it rotated around to many. And actually Cretan-Durham Hall was one of the sites. So it wasn't just houses of worship. Oh, absolutely. Yes. This is a much more efficient model. It's a model that's much more helpful for the families. As you might imagine, that model was sort of the least worst model. It was the availability and the willingness of congregations to make that heavy lift to be a temporary shelter for a month at a time, and that was a shelter that wasn't there otherwise. But a permanent shelter makes a huge difference. You have a door you can lock. You have a single point of pickup and drop off for children. We have tutors from Project Reach, which is part of St. Paul Public Schools, that will come in 3 to 4 days a week and actually provide tutoring for the kids. So there are a lot of services that come into the space, and that's one of the other new and really wonderful things about this model now is, in addition to those services, we now have a nurse, an on-call, on-site nurse that comes in 1 to 2 days a week. We just partnered with Change Inc. to begin providing mental health services, and we are working on a collaboration to provide play therapy for some of the kids. So we're able to, and the idea of bringing bringing services to people as opposed to sending people to services is sadly the cutting edge of the present and into the future. But that's how you create a person-centered human services system, by centering the person, not the system that they're beholden to. Yes, Daryl. Mm-hmm. 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 Yep. All of the emergency shelter housing is located in that space. Absolutely. Yes. So one of the ways that we've utilized volunteers, and on the last page of this packet, the weekend meal teams are that's the most regular recurring volunteer opportunity we have. So teams of 3 to 6 people for Saturday lunch and dinner and Sunday lunch and dinner. We have a weekend chef who's there who prepares the food, but can use assistance with setting it out, getting the meal, getting things ready, and then helping clean up afterward. And it's a great thing for I've been dropping hints to Elsa, and before Kira left, dropping them to Kira of, hey, this is a great thing especially for kids who are a little bit older or kids who can kind of help out. It's a great opportunity. But we only were able to kind of invite volunteers back in officially about a year or so ago for health and safety reasons for COVID. So we've the big lift has been, while this model of providing services to families is so much better for the families, we have had a huge disengagement with our houses of worship because the program's no longer in your space. So it doesn't feel as visible or as urgent, but the needs obviously of families in crisis haven't changed. It's just the location and where those services are happening. And also, it wasn't safe for a lot of people to volunteer during COVID. So that's what we're working on, kind of re-engaging right now. Yes.
Just hearing that, I wonder if it might be helpful to use that same kind of former project home model and say, October is this month to help do X and Y.
Oh yes, yes. Yeah, and that has been, so we have congregations who have kind of rethought that model of commitment. So St. John's just down the street, I believe they take the second Sunday dinner shift every month, and they've committed themselves to that. The woman who organizes the volunteers there is former military, so she has a pull and a way of getting things done that's extremely helpful. But we also have had there were the houses of worship that were hosts and partners in the month of I want to say it was of the month of August. We're up in St. Anthony Park, so St. Anthony Park UCC, St. Anthony Park Lutheran Church, and St. Matthew's, and then St. Cecilia's, I believe, as well. They all contacted each other and said, we're going to cover all of the month of August shifts for meal teams. But even then, they do, but then sometimes they don't. So what we're trying to do is find the rhythm that houses of worship are saying, this is what our new rhythm is, and houses of worship themselves, as you all know, what are we doing? What is our new rhythm? We were so used to doing things the previous way. What's going to be doable? How can we get people in? That is, if anyone here wishes to take upon themselves the task of saying we will do the month of October, or we will do the fourth Sunday of every month, or we will do the third Saturday of every month. The other thing that would be great. The other thing that's great is there are sort of add-ons, and you can see on the sheet. If you want to do more, you can bring dessert. You can bring in bars. Just budget for about 50 people. You can do a craft or a science project with the kids. We have a projector, and so you could bring G or PG movies in and do like a movie afternoon or evening thing. Any opportunity for parents to just be able to kind of not have to worry about their kids in the same kind of immediate way is it really 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 helps. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yep. It was always October. Is you mean a seasonality in terms of like the need of families, or need for volunteers? Well, the need for volunteers is always great. I would say I'm going to go out on a limb. Sarah might chide me for this later, but from what I've gleaned from her, the summer is actually the time when we have the most traffic in shelter. And the reason why is there are a lot of evictions that happen that landlords will hold off on because they don't feel good about it. They will hold off until the weather warms. So when the weather starts warming, landlords often will start to be more aggressive with the evictions. So we actually see an increase typically in use of shelter services and shelter space in the summer. And that coincides with the time when people are away at the cabin, on vacation, busy with summer camp with kids. So summertime is a time that when we can really, really use commitment. So to your point about, should House of Hope think about committing to half of October or to working with the partners that you worked with to help come in and fill volunteer shifts here for October? I would say it's a good place to start, and then the question would be: is there another time? Finding out when it's going to work for people here, but also knowing this, we have a big drop off in summer volunteer availability, and that's when often our needs kind of go up. So, does that help? Okay. I think you had a question earlier. Oh, it's hard to, yeah, sorry. Yep, okay. I will be sure to repeat the questions. I'm going to make sure that I am covering one of the things that we added to the program right before COVID hit. In September, October of 2019, the Family Place, which was the day program that families utilized during the day when they were staying in shelter, that closed, but almost all of the families that were going to the Family Place were coming from Project Home, and so we were actually able to absorb their staff. Most of the funding for that came through city and county contracts, and so we were able to absorb those staff members, and so we had the day program and shelter all kind of under one roof, and then the pandemic forced us actually to all be under one roof all the time and not to be moving around. And along the way, we were also able to add, we now have 2 full-time case managers who do rapid exit case management. And what that means is they are looking for the right fit of employment, schooling, housing for families as they exit. So it allows families to not only move out of shelter quicker, but more efficiently, and the likelihood that they stay in their shelter. I believe do we have that on? I don't think I have it on here, but on the second page of this handout, it's an overview of our fiscal year of 2023. The 66%, so of the 109 families that left the program, the 66% who were housed, 6 months later, all of those folks were still in their housing. Part of that case management is also doing 6-month follow-alongs and follow-ups, but also if there are additional services that the families want to access in terms of case management, they can reach back out to our case managers and say, hey, I've had this come up, or hey, I need this connection. For example, we had a family who moved out of shelter, and 2 months later, they had arranged for a payment plan with Xcel Energy, and they were behind in utility payments, but they had agreed to a set payment plan, and one payment came in late, and Xcel shut off their utilities And the utility shutoff meant that their new landlord said, you're going to be evicted if you don't get this bill paid by literally the end of the week. We reached out to houses of worship, and because I know how houses of worship function, we reached out to a lot of people and said, we need houses of worship to come together and pool discretionary funds to cover this bill. And we were able to do it. Multiple houses of worship said, we'll give $300. We've got this much left in discretionary. We can cover this. We can cover that. And that is one of the very, very tangible ways and extremely helpful ways of keeping people in housing. It is also one of the most common things that gets people knocked out of housing. And the amount of money that is invested in services to provide for families who experience homelessness after getting kicked out of housing is so much more significant than covering the rest of an energy bill, even a big bill like a $1,400 bill. Because what happened was they obviously didn't have a $1,400 a month payment plan with Excel, but that was the balance that was remaining. And Excel said, that's what you owe, and we're shutting off your utilities until it gets paid. Yes, Elise.
I just want to say that the Houses of Hope Fund, the endowed fund that's used for housing, for up until a couple of years ago, we were using that solely for building or rehabbing affordable housing, and now we're invoking a little-known clause that allows us to give money to organizations to help people stay in their homes, because it's a lot less expensive to keep someone in a home
Yes.
than it is to build them a new one.
Yep.
So this is a program that I think our Houses of Hope Fund could help to support,
Mm-hmm.
because, as you found, we've also heard from other organizations that it doesn't take much often to keep somebody in their home. They just don't have access to $300, $500,
Yep.
$1,000.
The St. Paul and St. Paul, Minnesota Foundation. I always get that mixed up because it's a little strange. But the St. Paul, Minnesota Foundation, they recently redid the grant guidelines, but for a while, if you had a contact at any 501c3 who was registered with them, they essentially could appropriate up to, I think, a one-time payment of $500 that could go directly to folks. And I was talking with one of our case managers when we were working through this issue of trying to get this money for this family, and he was like, they just redid the guidelines, so we don't have access to that anymore. Like, our families don't qualify. And so I was like, discretionary funds qualify. I know a few people we can call. That's just a story to sort of reaffirm the importance of that work, and that while it feels disconnected, it's extremely vital to the stability of our community and to the stability of families. I want to make sure. Sorry, I have my crib notes here from Sarah. I want to make sure that I'm covering all the things that we're talking about. Mental health. Yep. I think I've covered kind of most of the landscape of what's changed and what's been happening. Like I said, the last 3 pages of the handout that I provided are 3 ways that houses of worship can get involved. The Winter Gear Adopt a Family is pretty straightforward. Throughout the fall and the winter, we keep an updated list of all the families who are coming through shelter, and we ask them what their needs are in terms of warm weather gear. And then we solicit that, and we suggest that houses of worship or committees commit to sponsoring a whole family and getting new materials for that family. And it's nice because it gives you the specific idea of the specific needs that are being met by people, but it also creates, I think, an extremely helpful barrier and boundary so that your generosity can be met with the dignity of people by saying, this is what I asked for and I'm getting it, thank you very much. Those drop-offs continue throughout the fall and winter. I believe it says, when should we deliver the items? As soon as possible. There's a Sign Up Genius link, I believe it's right up at the corner here, and that's where we keep the information updated about what you can donate and what the needs are. The other fall to winter time activity that's really exciting is the Holiday Dignity Shop, and the way that we do this is it's basically setting up a shop for parents with new toys and new items to be able to come through and pick out what they want for their kids. So there is the option to donate new items. And there's also the option to come in and be a gift wrapper. So the families will bring you, this is what I'd like. Would you like a gift wrap? Would you like it in a bag? And you can be the person to do that for the family. There's guidelines along there. And then there's also, people who are like, I'm not sure about this. And you can say, well, I don't know. I mean, my grandkid really loves this, or like, I just saw this. You can be a shopping elf. You can be a setup elf, or a children's activity elf. While the parents are going through the shop, it's nice to have a distraction for the kids. And then finally, as we've talked about previously, the weekend meal teams. Every single weekend, there are no weekends off. Homelessness, unfortunately, does not take time off. So neither do we. But this is every Saturday, every Sunday. There's a lunch shift. There's a dinner shift. So those are some of the ways that you can get involved. And one last update that I wanted to make sure to cover with everybody: there was a big sea change in funding availability for homelessness services at the end of this last legislative session that directly impacted Project Home. And so I just want to give a brief overview of what that is and what that means, because I know that House of Hope has been a longtime supporter, not only in terms of volunteers, but also in terms of funding, specifically for Project Home. So in our June interactions, we messaged to everybody during the legislative session, which was hot and fast and furious and crazy. There was a lot of conversation back and forth about how funds were going to be appropriated and whether or not they were going to be appropriated to specific programs or specific areas of programming for homelessness services, or if it was going to be a general pot of funds, and what that may or may not mean. At the end of all of it, the Heading Home Ramsey County Continuum of Care Coalition, which was multiple providers for homelessness services in and around Ramsey County, received $11.4 million to maintain local shelter services and capacity in fiscal year 2024. And specifically, our Project Home is receiving $1.734 million. Our annual budget for Project Home is $2.2 million now. So that is a huge, huge win for us. And in addition to that, the state's emergency services program, or the ESP fund, will see a $30 million increase for year 24-25, and then a $55 million increase for 26 and 27. And the new base budget moving forward, starting in 2026, will be about $70 million. So over the course of the next few years, we'll be ramping up funding availability for homelessness services across the state. And because Interfaith Action has such great relationships not only with our other providers who provide complementary services or the same services that we do, but we also have really good connections with people at the state level in Ramsey County. We're pretty confident about funding this program in this extremely stable way going forward. So we got there because we did that work for so many years. The last story I want to share with you is, were any of you at the zoning commission planning meetings when we were trying to get the conditional use permit to occupy the provincial house? Was anybody here for that? So during the planning meeting, there were like somewhere in the vicinity of 500 people that showed up. But instead of showing up and shouting about, I don't want this homeless shelter in my backyard, almost to a person, people came up and talked about, I volunteered in Project Home for 15 years with my house of worship. And the stories just started pouring out and pouring out. The headline the next day in the Pioneer Press was YIMBY, yes, in my backyard. And the chair of the Planning Commission at the time was a member of St. Peter Claver, and said, I volunteered with Project Home in 5th grade. And that is the reason why I am on the trajectory of public service that I'm on today, and why I do this work. So it was amazing. But the only way we got here was by houses of worship being willing to say, yep, we'll be the least worst option. We will expand the provision of services for homeless families. It's not the greatest thing, but it's what we can do. It's what we're capable of doing. So I want to leave you with those stories, and thank you so much for the impact that your house of worship and all the other houses of worship had in making Project Home the success that it is today. Other questions? Other things you're curious about or wondering about? Yes?
I visited a number of churches in the last couple of 2 years
Mm-hmm.
that are having some traction in membership growth.
Mm-hmm.
And that in many cases they have, in effect, opened their facilities to the neighborhood and more widely.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of providing services in some cases or events.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any observations about opportunities or unmet needs in this area that House of Hope occupies that might be things we should consider as we chart our future?
Yeah, so the question is areas of unmet need in this area that House of Hope could be addressing in part by opening itself up more widely to the community. Yeah.
One example.
Yeah.
We used to participate as volunteers with Dayton Avenue Church with the clothing.
Right. Well, the clothing closet at Dayton Avenue Presbyterian. Yep. Right.
That went away, when the church closed.
Right.
But that was an example of
Mm-hmm.
where people, in that case, they might not. I'm saying there was a need that still is there.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure that there's a fulfillment.
Well, there's a lot of need in this. There's a lot of need in this neighborhood, and the people who know the need best are the ones who are experiencing it. And so, just the stance and the approach to saying we are going to commit to opening ourselves up to the neighborhood is huge, and to not lose momentum and steam on that is huge, because if you continue to engage the people who are experiencing the need in the community, you'll start to hear what's going on. There's a lot of conversation about what's going on in Old Rondo and New Rondo. There's a lot of conversation about land bridges. There's a lot of conversation about what's happening with I-94. And there's a lot of historic organizations and houses of worship who care deeply about what that future looks like. And even though it's not very far from here, it's just far enough. And generationally, it has been very far from the needs and the concerns of kind of Summit Avenue South. So there's great opportunity just in the posture and the positioning of opening. I want to tell you a story, Daryl, about this. I have two older brothers. One lives now in Ghana and is married to a woman who's from Ghana. They had multiple ceremonies over in Ghana. They wanted to come over here and get married stateside, and they asked me to officiate. I said, obviously, of course, I will do that. And he was like, could you help us find a church, to get married in? I called 2 Presbyterian churches. And I'm not going to name names. I didn't call House of Hope. They gave me some ideas of sort of where they wanted to do things, and I had kind of a geographic limitation, but it wasn't House of Hope. But I talked to 2 Presbyterian churches in the area. The first place said, well, we had some issues with this, and so now we don't do non-member weddings anymore. The second place, she told me a story about how there was a group that there had been a lot of Indians, so East Asian Indian immigrants to the area over the course of 8 to 10 years or something like that in their particular area of the cities. And they had started this group of, there were a group of folks who wanted to get together to have community events. And so they asked the church, could we have these events in your space? And they said, sure. And they used the space a little too rough. And the pastor said, I talked to them about a week after we had an incident where there was just, there was some staining on the carpet and there were some scuffs on the wall, and I was interacting with them and they said, well, we thought this was a community center. And she said, no, it's a church. That is a problem. That, I will come down solely on the side of that is a problem. It doesn't mean it's easy. There's a lot of beautiful things to worry about and be concerned about. There's a lot of reason why people are concerned about beautiful things. But to make the distinction between a church and assembly, in the New Testament, ecclesia doesn't just mean assembly, it means unlawful assembly. You were getting together without the imperial blessing to be able to gather and worship. It is so antithetical in my mind, I'm laying all my cards out on the table here, to say that there is a difference, that there is a fundamental difference between a church and a community center. So as House of Hope goes into the future, and it's going to be a long future. I mean, I've seen some of these drawings and, heard some of the talk about what is being undertaken here. It's going to be massive. Shying away from the conversation about what the community needs and what the church can do and how it can serve those are going to need to be held a little more lightly, and there's going to need to be a little bit different understanding of what are we prioritizing. Are we prioritizing the things that we've inherited, or are we prioritizing the people who live in our community? So I'll leave you with that story. And all my cards laid bare. But I think that those are the kinds of conversations that are going to be so critical to being an effective member of the community. And another thing that I will also say is that our community, our wider community that House of Hope and other houses of worship are part of, they will survive and they will thrive with or without those institutions. So how much more could they thrive? And how much better could they be at surviving and doing well if those institutions supported their needs and their concerns? Yeah.